Yes, please.
We can start.
Well, welcome everybody to this third session in Recollections for the centenary of the Baha'i Faith in Australia. And tonight, AaronBlomeley is with us and his wife Claire is with him. Thank you for being with us tonight. Aaron has been a member of the Australian Baha'i community for 6 decades and more, and he's traveled and lived in other countries as well. And we invited him tonight to share some of his recollections of those early days, his own story, and that of the communities he's been in, and maybe some of the Baha'is that he's met in his time. So without any further ado, I hand over to Aaron. We look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, well, as I said before, we're going to try and share the screen and see how we go. There we are. So the point I was making with this slide is that when we're talking about the 50s and 60s, it's a long time before selfies and other areas of taking photography. I remember coloured slides were, in those days, $1 a slide. So you're very careful with what you took. These days with digital cameras, who gives a damn? You take as many as you like. And times have changed, both Baha'i-wise and in the community around us. So I became a Baha'i in Adelaide. My recollections of Adelaide, I don't have many pictures at all, but I did want to show this picture, an old picture of Adelaide when I was there. It was a good memory for me. Balfour's Cakes, or Balfour Bakery, I think it was called, is still operating in Adelaide, and I blame them for my sweet tooth and all my toothaches. So, but fortunately I never got hooked on Capstan cigarettes. So I've done reasonably well in that sense. But Adelaide, very, very beautiful place, beautiful city, as anybody that lives there knows. When Graham asked me to do this presentation, I thought it was important to speak about some of the bedrocks of the Baha'i communities where I've lived. When I shared my presentation with Graham, he hesitated and said, "Aaron, you've missed the brief." And I said, "Well, in what way? You're the professor, what am I supposed to do?" And he said, "I want you to focus more on AaronBlomeley and the community that surrounded him." Well, that really appealed to my ego. And now you have to put up with a lot more stories about me. I hope you enjoy them. As I said before, if I've got them wrong, please tell me afterwards. Let's not interrupt too much while I'm talking. So, Adelaide, tremendously proud of South Australia. You know, Percy and Macy Armand were the first Baha'is in South Australia, and they were members of the first Spiritual Assembly of Adelaide, formed in 1924. And think of that. My Mother Dunn came, Father Dunn came, 1920. 4 years later, they're forming their first Spiritual Assembly in Adelaide. Wonderful, wonderful time. And yes, when I joined the faith in 1956, they were still very active members in the community. Macy herself, kind, wonderful hostess, looked after us, young people, had a quiet sense of humour. Perce, much quieter. He's an accountant, and I realise we shouldn't stereotypes, but he wasn't an accountant. And that may explain his quietness, but it certainly explains why he was the treasurer of the National Spiritualist Assembly in Australia. He was not a forceful person. I think that's important because I want to get on to somebody else that was forceful, but he was tenacious, tireless, absolutely tireless in his love for the Guardian, as for all of the Baha'is that I met at that time. And they all held a very strict integrity in their personal behaviour, a wonderful example to a young fellow like me. Perce and Macy, I remember them turning up to firesides in a very small car, absolutely overloaded with inquirers. And this is the days before seatbelts, and yes, they were overloaded. But there they were, big smiles on their face and lots of people inquiring about the faith itself. And this is a picture of the first NSA of the Baha'is of Australia and New Zealand. Perce Armand over here, Oswald Whittaker, of course, first Baha'i in Australia, Father Dunn. And it's interesting to notice that there are 5 ladies on that assembly, 4 men. I think the NSA we've got this year has the same ratio. which is nice to see the ladies making a significant contribution to our community. When Person Macy became Baha'is back in 1924, membership in the Baha'i community simply required a profession of faith and regular attendance at meetings. Becoming a Baha'i in 56 was an entirely different process. When I first heard of the Baha'i faith, it was in the home of Madge and Collis Featherston, went to firesides for about 6 months. I remember the first meeting I went to, he was showing an 8mm film. Remember those days, the old films that went on? And he was showing his trip to Haifa. And he spoke a lot about this person called Shoghi Effendi, who produced these beautiful gardens. And I remember going home thinking, well, Shoghi Effendi, he's a great gardener, isn't he? Which shows the level of or the lack of my spiritual experience. I came to learn, of course, very quickly, he was much more than a gardener. But after about 6 months, I decided I should become a Baha'i. But in fact, Carlos and Madge were the people that I'd spent most time with and had very little connection with the rest of the Baha'i community. So I actually wrote to Madge and Carlos and said, look, I want to be a Baha'i. They were very sweet, very beautiful, came down and spoke to my parents, pointed out I wasn't joining some weird sects that would take me away from the family, set up a lovely relationship, which meant that my parents later on became Baha'is, eternally grateful to that community in Adelaide. But then Carlos and Madge, they said to me, well, you've been coming to our place in Port Adelaide, and that's beautiful, but you know, you're going to become a Baha'i in Woodville and you need to be interviewed by the local spiritual assembly in Adelaide. Well, I didn't know anybody in Adelaide. That's all right, Aaron, here's the address, turn up there 7:30 next Tuesday night. So I go to this address to see a person I'd never met before. So I walk down the pathway, get to the door, knock on the door, and this beautiful lady, Emily Wakefield, opens the door and says, oh, you must be Aaron, come on in. Well, I walk in and there I find, that's my card, and you'll see that when they finally accepted me in the faith, you'll notice we should do Master AaronBlomeley, proof that I was in fact a very young fellow. But here I walked in and here's people sitting in a circle, arms folded, ready to interview me. And they asked me several questions. Simple ones, do you know Baha'u'llah? Do you know Baha'u'llah? Do you accept your station? Etc., etc. And all these questions were quite easily answered by me. But then they said, and have you read and do you understand the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha? Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, I've never heard of it. But I want to be a Baha'i. These people aren't going to stop me being a Baha'i. Yeah, sure, I say, I've read it, I know all about it. Thank God they never asked me any questions, just took my word for it. And so I started my whole Baha'i life with a lie, and it wasn't until many years later I'm doing Ruri Book 1 and realised that truthfulness is the foundation of all virtues. So of course the next day I rushed down to the Featherston family and say, what's this book I'm supposed to reread? What is it? Oh, Aaron, sorry, we forgot to tell you, here's the book, take it home and read it. I took it back, and a week later I went back and asked Collis, yes, I read it, but what happens if the guardian dies without leaving a successor? And remember, this is 1956, and Collis answered, well, we may find out, because we're not sure who will be the successor. And what a foretelling moment that was. And we know that the guardian died the next year. The Australian Baha'i community in those days, and maybe is now, was, how would you say, solidly obedient, but nitpicking. Interesting combination. And so we'd argue about all the small things, but totally obedient to the big things. So when the guardian died, again, I'm still a young, callow youth, but there's no threat, no feeling of fear around the community, none whatsoever. So I'm saying, well, what's going to happen? Relax, Aaron, it's fine. The hands will tell us what's going to happen. And we sat back and waited for that. And it was just a really powerful understanding of why we had to read the Will and Testament of Bahai and understand that the hands were, in fact, the stewards of the faith. There wasn't any problem. It was all set out there, and I understood why it was important for me to be asked that question. Have you read, do you understand the Will and Testament of Bahai? Enormous, enormous message for me to carry on. So it was, you know, these people that were interviewing me, and thank God they never asked me questions, but there it was. We did that. Back to Adelaide, another couple that sit firm in my memory, couple Eric and Marjorie Bowes. Now, the Guardian specifically mentions them in the compilation Messages to the Antipodes. And Graham spoke about this last week and said there's a new edition coming out. But I'm quite sure that Eric and Marjorie will be there mentioned in this book. They lived in a beautiful property in the Adelaide Hills. They opened up this for Bahai activities, and their home was a place of rest. And sometimes for many months, Mother Dunn would rest there. In fact, it was there that I first met Mother Dunn. Now, I want to point out Eric was born in 1902, in his mid-50s when I first met him, which meant, as far as I was concerned, he was an old man, certainly old enough to be my father. And before becoming a Bahai, he was a lay preacher in the Methodist Church. So unlike Perth Armand, Eric was a powerful public speaker, and one of his passions, and this is the beautiful thing, one of his passions was to encourage youth to develop their public speaking abilities. And so he would bring us together. He would invite us up to their property, encourage us to give talks to the adults. And he encouraged us to develop those public speaking capabilities. And every time I would give a talk, I'd go and talk to him. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? And he would always come back with very concrete advice, building confidence in young people to project the faith in a favourable way. Eric and Marjorie, they served on the committee that produced Herald of the South. Us that have been around a long time would remember that. Eric himself was a writer. He wrote a book called Great Themes of Life. Sorry for the rather tattered look, but that's my original copy. And enormous effect on us to read what he wrote. He wrote The Cause of Life to the World. He wrote These Things Shall Be. They were so valuable to us. As I mentioned, it was in their home that I first met Hand of the Cause Mother Dunn. And I remember when she travelled to Haifa in November 1957, it was Marjorie Bowes who accompanied her. But, you know, if you want to know more about Mother Dunn, because tonight's not about Mother Dunn, then, and I'm sorry for the poor quality of this, but go to this website, Mariette Leong, absolutely wonderful YouTube presentation, will tell you much more than I know. And Mariette, if you're listening, thank you for producing that and making it available to all of us. Absolutely magnificent presentation on YouTube. And I didn't meet Mother Dunn again until 1958, when we had the Intercontinental Conference in Sydney. What a wonderful, wonderful meeting that was. And because it was an Intercontinental Conference, we were able to view the picture of Baha'u'llah in the Hazrat al-Quds in Lang Road. Now, you ask me, what did I see? And I'll tell you, I have no idea. You just walk past that picture. I burst into tears and went out to the veranda that was outside at the Hazrat al-Qud, and I'm out there, and just a very short time later, another young chap called Peter Khan came and joined me. And a very emotional scene. We'd sort of look at each other, burst into tears, pull ourselves together, take a deep breath, then look at each other again and burst into tears again. And we didn't realise, but we were outside the flat where Mother Dunn was living. And she must have got tired of all this bubbling going on outside. And she came out sweet, sweet, sweet as you can imagine. And she came up and she said in that lovely Irish lilt that she's got, "I think you two boys need to come in and have a cup of tea." So we went into her flat and had tea with Mother Dunn and helped us to regain some composure. It was just one of those very beautiful moments that you're able to share as a young person. There are so many people I could talk about, but I want to mention another couple that had a very profound effect on me, Harold and Florence Pfitzner. When I became a Bahai, they'd already gained the title of Knights of Baha'u'llah by pioneering to what was then Portuguese Timor. They were early believers in Adelaide, members of the Adelaide Assembly in 1929. And remember, this is a long time before photocopiers. Do you remember when the first photocopiers came out? Goodness, that a secretary was a gun that came and you said, "I needed 2 copies." And she'd be saying, "Where's your authorization?" These days, goodness me, how easy it is to get photocopiers. But those things didn't exist in those days. So Harold would tell me how he and Florence would sit up late at night typing out the tablets of Abdul Baha and distribute them to fellow Baha'is in Adelaide. And remember, there was no photocopiers, there was no gestetners, it was carbon paper. You sit down and type out 50 copies of the same message. The dedication of people like this is just beyond our imagination. Now, they pioneered to Timor, but each year they'd return to Adelaide to visit family. And this period from Timor back to Adelaide would always require a stopover in Darwin. It was when they stopped over in Darwin, did they have a rest? No, they'd be out teaching. How do they get to teach in this place? And it was through their efforts that a lady called Ruth Sinclair, this lady here, became a Baha'i. No, that's not her baby. This is Alison Scott. But Ruth Sinclair was the first Baha'i, as far as I know, in Darwin. It's important because she actually became the reason why I moved to Darwin. But let's get back to the fitness. They incredible couple. They would, this is in Timor. You can see here, Harold there, as he always dressed in the tropics, dressed in white, tie. His wife, Florence, my oldest daughter, Nolene, the kid with his finger up his nose is my oldest son, Noel, who's now on the area teaching committee in Darwin. And yes, this guy did think it was a bit of a hoot, what was going on. So this was Timor. We went there. And the Pfitzner's had their own home. This was the home taken, picture we took in 1964. And that's still the Baha'i Centre in Dili, Timor. It's been done up, there's been buildings added. It's a centre for Rui books now, huge Rui books centre. And I remember when we visited them for this particular visit in 1964, I said to Harold and Florence, "So what is it that we can bring you? What can we bring you from Darwin?" Well, the answer was pretty simple. We'd like some Weet-Bix and some Vegemite. So welcome to Australia. This was important to them. But what a wonderful company. And with that teaching in celebrating the 200th anniversary of the birth of Baha'u'llah, the president of Timor, Francisco Guterres, addressed a message to the Baha'i community. And he said this, right? I particularly welcome the spirit of tolerance and acceptance which marks the thinking of its inspirer and the teachings of the Bahai faith. This spirit of respect, tolerance towards fellow human beings, regardless of religion, contributes to social harmony. What a beautiful recollection from those Knights of Baha'u'llah, Harold and Florence. But let's come back to Darwin, which is, I moved up there 1959. I went to convention. Ruth Sinclair turned up there and said, I'm the only Baha'i in Darwin. There's no one between me and Brisbane, no one between me and Adelaide. How can I deepen in the faith unless somebody's there? So me, being an impetuous youth, decided, well, sounds like a lot of fun. I'll move to Darwin. I did that. And what a wonderful bounty, because 1961, Rahir Khanum came and spent some time with us. Can you imagine that? Just half a dozen of us. Rahir Khanum comes to do some rest and recreation before she continued on her world travels. Now, you might ask me, so what spiritual insights did you get from spending time with Rahir Khanum, hand of the cause, wife of the guardian? There must have been the gems of wisdom she dropped in your lap. Unfortunately, no. I'm just overawed with the presence of somebody like that. I couldn't ask a question. I just take in what I can. And unfortunately, I am quite a simple person. So what do I remember? I remember we had a barbecue at the back, in our backyard. And Rahir Khanum came, of course, with Jessie Revell. We had probably 30 visitors, 30 guests from Groote Eylandt, Aboriginal people who came to share the barbecue with us. And what do I remember from that? Well, specifically, I remember that Rahir Khanum showed us how to roast marshmallows on the barbecue fire. Now, if that's a spiritual insight, I'm sorry, that's the best I can give. But it was one of those magic moments of seeing basically the most important, most prestigious person in the Baha'i community sharing marshmallows with 20 or 30 other people over a barbecue. And it's something that stays with me of the, how can you say, the leveling of authority within the Baha'i community of individuals. And it's something which has carried with me throughout my whole life. Now, still in Darwin, we all know of Uncle Fred Murray, the first full-blood Aboriginal person to join the faith in Australia. And I think in 2 weeks' time, June Perkins, you're with us tonight. June will give a presentation on the life of Fred Murray. But I asked, what about Alice Doran? Alice Doran was the first full-blood Aboriginal lady to become a Baha'i in Australia. Alice Doran is the lady on the right, in case you got confused there. The lady on the left is Scottish, Australian, and both Baha'is and both very, very close friends. Now, Alice was married to an Irish guy, Paddy Doran, old tin miner. They lived out of Darwin in a very simple accommodation. And we would go out there and spend time out there. And I was out there one Saturday, and we're sitting around outside under the trees. And after a while, Alice looked across at me and said, Aaron, I need to go home. Alice, this is home, isn't it? No, I mean home, over there, you know. Oh, you mean Mandorah? Yeah, where my people are. Yeah, sure. When do you need to go? Now. Oh, geez. Why? My brother just died. Oh, Alice, how on earth do you know your brother just died? We're out in the bush, there's no phone, you've had no visitors. He told me. No, he told me. I looked up and there's a bird in the tree. Well, what am I supposed to do? Okay. Mandorah it's maybe 80, 90 kilometres, end of the wet season. Road, we were probably no one had been on that road during the wet season. Dirt track, no bridges, but hell, Alice wanted to go, so we jumped into my international utility and headed off there. And after fording creeks and getting the fright of my life when freshwater crocodiles had come too close, we finally made Mandorah. When we arrived to her settlement area, there was a lot of wailing, a lot of crying, a lot of obviously distraught people. When Alice got out, they rushed over, greeted her. I was totally ignored. And I stood by the international youth wondering what to do. And while I was there, one of the older men of the community came up and stood alongside me in a very quiet voice. He just looked at me and said, "I'm glad Alice got the message." And that was it. And it's just incredible the contact these people have. The bird told her. Now, in my life, that doesn't happen, right? This guy just comes up and says to me, "I'm glad Alice got the message," and then he walked away. And I was just left to turn around, do a U-turn, and head back home again. And this person, our first full-blood Aboriginal Bahai, just so deep in our own culture, so deep in Bahai culture. So time to move on before I get too emotional. We're out of Australia. We moved on. I moved back to Sydney in the late 1960s, and of course at that time proclamation was the drive of the Bahai community around the world, in Australia as well. And there's enormous amount of work put in by the Bahai community to proclaim the faith of the public. Now, take a look at this picture. Take a look. That temple, that model, we built out of wood and wire mesh. And they sat down and made thousands, tens of thousands of white paper roses. And then tied them onto that model. What wonderful acts of unity are going on in the community at that time. You'll notice people there, Fiona MacDonald, who's here, who's now a member of the NSA, Verona Major, who pioneered to Timor. So many others involved in this proclamation to the Australian public. And it was also a focus of time of Aboriginal teaching. And this is a picture, you might think, well, that's a fairly simple picture, but it's so symbolic. This is the Hobby family who pioneered to Elka Island in the 70s. This is Julie Hobby, who's now a member of the Gold Coast community. And she brought up with her brothers and sisters, her mum and dad, totally isolated from what we'll call Western community. And I've grown up to be wonderful Baha'is, teaching out there in a way that is not done normally. Her parents became Baha'is in Grafton. They're actually, what's the right word, hippies of the 70s. We're not city people. After being Baha'is for a year or so, they realized that they were not ever going to be city people, but as Baha'is, they need to give service. And what was the best way of doing it? Well, their nature, their way of life moved them to work in Aboriginal communities. And these days, of course, it's continued. People like Chris Branso working out of Alice Springs, dozens of others doing that wonderful, wonderful work. So these are pictures I've got, and I can't move on. I can't leave Australia, and I know we're moving on time, but I can't leave Australia without showing a picture of our erstwhile Graham Hassel. It's always good to see these youth, Tessa Scrime, the boy that had his finger up his nose. No, they're all grown up now. They're all part of this wonderful Bahai community. So where do we go to from here? Well, I actually wanted to move on to Papua New Guinea. And Papua New Guinea was mentioned by Abdul Baha in 1916. But the first Baha'is didn't arrive until 1954. And that was when Vai Honky and Rodney Hancock, I think Rodney Hancock's with us, so please, Rodney, bear with me if I get things wrong. But I'd love Rodney, perhaps afterwards, to tell us some of the persecution they faced just by fraternising with the local people. I understand, and I'm not sure, and Rodney can clarify this, but I think he was at one stage deported from PNG because he stayed in a village overnight without permission, fraternising with the locals without permission from the colonial governor. Imagine that, imagine that. Via a nurse, ostracised because she would give the same attention to the local people as she did to the white people in the area. The first local spiritual assembly of PNG, local assembly 1958. The NSA was formed in 1969. Its members included names that many of us would know: Noel and Margaret Pluitt, David and Sue Podger, for instance. But from that first NSA, 1969, the country boasts over 200,000 followers, about 6% of the total population. How many countries in this world have 6% Bahai population? And as we know, it's the nation where the House of Justice is nominated for the erection of the National Glasgow. Violet is quoted as saying, what seemed at first an enormous challenge has now become a reality. And isn't that true? In the teaching work, Violet focused on the highlands. She was a tough lady, believe me, she was tough, but she had to be. She walked over the mountains. She drove along tortuous roads. She confronted some pretty wild people. And I know that some of them pretty wild because when I was working in PNG in the 1990s, I met a few of them. And these are people that today would threaten to kill you and tomorrow carry you across the river so your feet wouldn't get wet. So it was a very confrontational situation, and you have to be careful where you met. People in the Mount Brown region accepted the faith with enthusiasm, and it was again in the mountains, difficult place to get to. A lot of the work was also then carried on by Councillor Naraki. What a wonderful inspiration he was to everybody that was there. And we're lucky enough to have his son with us here on the Gold Coast. Oh man, what a great community we are right here. Now, I mentioned Mount Brown, and there was a time when the Baha'is, Mount Brown's in the middle of the highlands. There's an airstrip there, but not many people could afford to fly in and fly out. So most people would do a 2 or 3 day walk down to the main road, get what they called a PMV, public motor vehicle, small taxis, and get that into town. And the Baha'is found that the PMVs were not picking them up. And they managed to get into the city, spoke to Councillor Naraki, and seen that the local pastor in Mount Brown had told the drivers of PMVs not to pick up the Baha'is. They're heretics and should not be allowed to be in the vehicle. So Councillor Naraki flew up to Mount Brown, arranged a meeting with the pastor. Remember, it's a confrontational community. And so you had Councillor Naraki on one side with the local assembly behind him, the pastor on the other side with a member of his church behind him, and sitting far enough apart so that you could speak clearly but not be physically in touch. And Councillor Naraki had prayers and spoke about Christian love, and then said how he'd heard that the Baha'is weren't able to get the PMVs and how this seemed contrary to Christian teachings, etc., etc. And the pastor said, well, wasn't me. I haven't given that instruction. And the conversation continued a little while. And then one very brave person behind the pastor stood up and said, Pastor, I was one of those PMV drivers that you told not to pick up the Baha'is. Imagine the bravery of that person to contradict the pastor in front of others. Councillor Naraki ignored the statement, just kept talking. And when it finished, they all stood up, came over, shook hands, and the pastor came close to Councillor Naraki and said, the Baha'is will be able to ride in the PMVs from tomorrow. And that's a beautiful way of the way the faith solved problems through consultation without confrontation. I could go on with many other stories, but we're running out of time. So let me just say that I was in PMG working fly in, fly out for a mining company. And believe me, fly in, fly out is not very beneficial for your spiritual development. Great for your bank account, but not much else. So I decided it was time to move, and I was lucky enough to get a job as manager for the Bahai Office of the Environment in Taiwan. Well, what a shock that was. Australia is fairly confrontational. Papua New Guinea, much more so. And I enjoyed it. I'm a Bahai, but believe me, I enjoyed it. Then I went to Taiwan, where I found that to raise your voice would put people in tears. And after 6 months, I realized everybody in my office was in tears. And I'm going, oh dear, this ain't working. So either I've got to change or I've got to go back to Australia, because I'm obviously not achieving what I need to achieve here. So now I don't know who's listening, but I'm going to tell you, don't you ever tell me you're too old to change. Because here I was in my 50s and realizing I had to change. So I found a Taiwanese Bahai who spoke good English. I said, please, will you mentor me through the change and allow me to serve Taiwan? And so I'd get in a situation, I'd muck it all up, and I'd go to this guy and I'd say, John, I think I did it wrong. Tell me what happened. And I'd tell him, he'd say, oh, Aaron, oh dear, this is the way you should have done it. And I would take that home and I'd mentor it in my head. I'd just play that video over and over in my head. So next time a similar situation came up, I would handle it better. And eventually it worked. The Bahai Office of the Environment became very successful in its taking environmental awareness out to the community. We were an institution of the National Spiritual Assembly, but most of our funding came from the Department of Education. But before I get on to the Bahai Office of the Environment, let me just talk a little bit about Taiwan. First Baha'is arrived in 1947 when Chiang Kai-shek came across. The faith continued to grow. Our very own, whoops, that's not the story I wanted. Taiwan. Yeah, that was the story I was going to tell, but we're running out of time. So I moved to Taiwan, and Collis Featherstone came. I think it was 1985. Now, if you're going to smile at the spelling of his name, then I'll ask you, please interpret this for me, and we'll see who has the best cultural language. I'd have to ask Claire to tell it, because I have no idea what it says. But it was welcoming Mr. Featherstone, who then met with Vice President Mr. Lee and explained the Baha'i faith to him. The first NSA for Taiwan was elected in 1967, and there was considerable opposition to the faith. a lot of huge opposition when they said, we want to form the NSA of the Baha'is of Taiwan. And Chiang Kai-shek said, this is not Taiwan, this is the Republic of China. You must call yourselves the National Spiritual Assembly for the Republic of China. And it took a lot of dealing with the government officials to point out that national in this sense doesn't mean national boundaries. We have a National Spiritual Assembly of Honolulu, of Hawaii, I should say. And so, yes, this was Taiwan, and it was eventually accepted. But remember, it was a military dictatorship. It was ruled by martial law. And Baha'is were harassed quite considerably. Members of the National Spiritual Assembly had to go to the national government for vetting at the time. Martial law was eventually lifted in 1987, rescinded in 1991. And that was just a year before I moved to Darwin, to Taiwan. And the teaching was very significant. We had a lot of visitors. We had a lot of work. This is Baha'i Office of the Environment. We worked closely with Taipei Zoo. We arranged to get thousands of photos from around the world. The beauty of being part of a world faith is that you have these contacts. And we had this display of 400 of the best pictures there in the Taipei Zoo for 10 days. 13,000 people came through and seen this and established this as an organisation that could get things done. We had visits of the Voices of Baha. Remember the Voices of Baha? Tom Price would organise it each year, and Tom, living in Adelaide now, I think, brought this wonderful, wonderful Baha'i choir. The ladies, yes, they are all ladies, I think, down the bottom here, are Baha'is, English-speaking Baha'is, that volunteered to adopt one couple, any two, just two people, and they would escort them around Taiwan, translate for them, show them where to eat, where to travel, and provided wonderful, wonderful inspiration to everybody, both ways. There was pioneers, of course, in Taiwan. And this is a picture of Baha'is taken 1999. And you see the number of the pioneers that come from Malaysia. Enormous strength being given there. And Ghana was represented there, Australia, and a few others. But I remember this conference specifically because it was at this conference we realized that we were actually not helping the progress of the faith in Taiwan. And we made a solemn agreement there that we would not allow English to be spoken at any formal meeting we went to. We would not allow any translation to be made on our behalf. And of course, we had private conversations of people telling us what was going on. But the people that found it hardest to accept were the Taiwanese people. They felt it was so impolite not to be able to translate for us. But we stuck to our guns. Do not translate. Do not allow us to interfere with the progress. And I must admit, from that point, the faith really, really blossomed. Kaohsiung at this time had 12 Baha'is. 4 years later, had 120 Baha'is. Because all the teaching was done in the local language. It was an enormously strong decision made, and it just forced us. It was our job to learn the language. Abdul Baha made that clear. We were just trying to be obedient. But I still remember that clear decision being made. But thank you for listening. I could go on for an awful long time, but I think it's time to hand back to Graham. And Graham, you could take questions, or people have any new ideas, please go ahead. I'm going to stop the share now and we'll go back to Graham. Thank you very much.
Aaron, thank you so much for that. There are so many questions that we'd like to ask you. I think what we'll do is if everybody could remain on mute, and put your hand up. I will see your hand. And then you can, once I recognize you, if you unmute yourself and ask Aaron a question, and ask him lots of curly, tricky questions, because he loves that confrontation. So Helen, were you clapping or were you asking questions?
Indeed, I was clapping. Thank you. I don't have any questions.
All right. Aaron has online, say, Eddie, I see you. We have friends online from New Zealand, from Australia, from the World Centre, maybe other places as well. We've got friends who have pioneered in Papua New Guinea online, who could ask questions or respond to some of those comments. We've got friends from the early days in South Australia when Aaron was a youth. So let's enjoy asking Aaron some more questions. Who would like to start? Eddie, did you want to ask something? You just have to unmute and then you can do so. You have to unmute.
Eddie's my neighbour. He can ask me the question tomorrow. That's fine.
Eddie, I'll unmute you, okay?
I'm right. I've got it now. Can you hear me, Aaron?
Yeah, I can indeed. I see you this afternoon.
I didn't think I was going to ask you a question, but when you were telling the story about Alice, the first full-blooded Aboriginal woman to become a Bahai, you told me a story about that recently that I found very spiritual, actually, about how she actually became a Bahai.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to say that or not? Is there not enough time?
I can. A Bahai called Alice, I'm trying to think of, isn't that terrible? Mortal was part of the community, and she and her son Paul were the first people who made contact with Paddy Doran, her husband, and Alice. And remember, they lived out in the bush, and they made contact. They were friends. They then made contact with the Bahai community, and so they were saying that one morning they were in Darwin, and Paddy and Alice came knocking on the door and burst in, and I understand this is not meant to be racist, but if you can imagine a person with dark skin turning pale, well, that was Alice, and Paddy wasn't much better. They were quite agitated state, and so what's the problem? What's happening? And they said, we need to become Baha'is. Why? Well, we both had a dream last night. Paddy's parents came to him, my relatives came to me and said we had to become Baha'is. And Alice was literally shaking with fear. She said, "And if I don't become a Baha'i, they're going to come back and give me hell. So please, poor mortal, allow me to become a member of the community." And it was just one of those spiritual moments. And again, I have no way of understanding that connection, but it was there. It was there, and beautiful, firm Baha'is through until the end. Thanks for asking the question.
Thank you, Aaron. I think it's wonderful what we've learned. So thank you very much. I'll keep quiet now.
Thank you for that. Who's next? Who's got a question? Rodney Hancock, you were challenged early in the session.
I would write to Rodney when I was in Darwin, and he was setting up a business, and so my ties to Rodney go back a long way. So come on, Rodney, help me out about Papua New Guinea.
Aaron, I might also say that you were many years in Randwick, and Eva Grant and John Grant are online. Maybe other friends are in Randwick as well. Do you have any memories of the first Randwick Baha'is and others that you met in Sydney? You haven't mentioned that.
Come on, Eva, you were the reason why we moved to Randwick. Your beautiful, beautiful family.
I wasn't fishing for an answer. I was just,
No, I want to hear from Eva.
Eva, welcome.
I can't resist saying thank you to all of you who came to Randwick. You all added so much, especially you and Pam and the children. Wow, this was our family. All of you, all Sue and David Podger. I can't help myself. My family is sitting there 50 years later. Yes, thank you.
Can I interrupt there?
Yep.
Another story. You know that Johnny has some difficulty with hearing, right? And so we would visit Fred and Eva, and they were very happy for John to make noise because he could hear it, right? He could hear something. And so my kids loved it. You mean we can come here and make as much noise as we like? It was just a whole new world for them. And Fred and Eva become their favourite home to go to.
Thank you for that. And also Bahia and Mossin are online as well from Randwick, and Faren's here. Faren's mother's here. But we're trying to coax Aaron to talk about those early days in the 60s, 70s.
But other people can talk about it. So Moxon, you came out and joined us in Randwick in, when was it, 69?
Yes, that's correct. I arrived from Egypt in 66, actually, end of 66.
Wow.
And I am very pleased to say that Graham's dad, David Hassel, he hosted me in his house after being at the Bahai Summer School for a couple of weeks as a guest of the National Spiritual Assembly. And then I went to Graham and Judy's house, and they really looked after me. They got me a job, they looked after me. And then till I got my independence, and then I moved to Aaron and Pam's Blomeley's house. So I was really, I wouldn't say I was lonely first when I came to Australia because my English wasn't that good. So it's really helped me progress in English, and became a member of the LSA of Randwick, which was brand new for me, just a young boy just arrived from Egypt. And I served the community. And, he was talking about Randwick. We had so much activity with the La Perouse. I call him Uncle Freddie, Eva's husband. We used to go to La Perouse and take foods and vegetable, like a lot of food and fruits. And we go there teaching the Aborigine in La Perouse. And I think, Eva, you should tell them more about our teaching in La Perouse, because up to now, Eva, she still have a lot of friends in La Perouse. And we are so happy, active community when David and Judy, Graham and Jane Hassel, they were in Randwick. So it's a good memory to remember. And then Bahia, of course, she came from Egypt and joined, and she was well known for her hospitality, cooking food for the whole community and taking food to the, anyway, she's shy. She doesn't want to say anything about that.
But it's true.
Yeah, so thanks, Aaron, for it. I enjoyed your talk. It's very good to find out the history of travel. And I'm glad that Graham brought you to talk to the whole community. It's very nice to hear all this nice history.
Yes.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Mawson, and hi, Bahia. Good to see you.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you very much for organizing this. It's wonderful. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you. Friends, I think we have, Janet, did you hear?
We can hear Janet there. Hi, Janet.
Janet, were you going to say, because you also are in Randwick, and Oya is there maybe with a question. John Walker has a question. Janet, did you want to ask something, Janet, or make a comment, or you have to unmute yourself?
No, Peter and I were there for just about 5 or 6 months when he was at University of New South Wales on sabbatical. And the thing I remember about that period of time was such an active community, very united, with wonderful firesides, many of which were held at the Hassel home. And there were activities at the university with the students. And it was a very rich time, and lots and lots of activities, very happy time. Yeah.
Janet, thank you for that, and may I be so bold as to suggest that sometime maybe we would love to hear your own recollections sometime in the future when you're ready to share them. That would be wonderful. There were a few hands up. I'm sorry if I just missed that order there. John Walker, did you have something that you wanted to ask or say?
Talking about Randwick, I can tell you about the formation of the local assembly of Randwick, because I was present at that formation. The story is as follows. The regional teaching committee, of which David Podger was the representative at the time, and I think he was present at the formation of the assembly. He can, that's my recollection, but he can confirm that. But we had 9 people in Randwick, including myself, and I was the secretary of the Randwick Bahai group. So I wasn't old enough to be on the assembly. And so we needed one person to form the assembly. And we had one contact, and we decided that we would meet on this particular night in the home of May Beat. And we told this person, who was Barry O'Brien, some of you may know him. We told Barry that, you know, we were going to meet that night, and we were hoping to form the local spiritual assembly, and we were expecting him to show up and to become a Bahai. So anyway, we met and we said prayers, and probably about, you know, sort of 3/4 of an hour after we started, there's a knock on the door, and Barry turns up with a great big smile, and he says, "Are you waiting for me?" and we were. And so by joint declaration, the local spiritual assembly was formed that night in the home of May Beat. I remember it very vividly, particularly Barry O'Brien's great big smile, where he sort of was giving the impression that he was holding out until the very last moment to give us a big surprise. Also, I have very fond memories of Eva and Fred Grant, but that's for another time.
Thanks so much, John. And I'm just wondering how we're going to get enough evenings to hear so much that needs to be shared. So thank you for that. We will try and follow up on that. Oya, please, do you have a question or a comment? Sorry, you have to unmute yourself. Please go ahead, Oya.
Okay. I would like to mention, first of all, Aloha to everyone. And I'm so appreciate that by this wonderful arranged this program. 20 years I'm here. Believe me, I will never enjoy as I am enjoyed to see the lot of Bahai, Australian Bahai and their activity. Always was my wish to know that the program, activity of Bahai community, Australian Bahai community, I'm very proud of you, all Baha'is, Australian Baha'is. I learned that how much you spend your love, your time for Baha'u'llah. I learned from you. That is wonderful. All your assembly, when I heard that 6 members of assembly go pioneering to, go to different islands to pass the message of Baha'u'llah. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Friends, we're going to finish soon. And so if there are any final questions, we don't want to prolong too long, but it's been wonderful having this evening. I see you there. It'd be good to hear from you. I've encouraged David and Sue Podger to come online sometime in the future and tell us more of their story.
Graham, I raised my hand so many times.
Oh, sorry, Ahmed. I'll go to Edwin and then to you. But I was just also making sure that David and Sue agree publicly to come online sometime and share so much more of their story. So.
I just wanted to ask Aaron, who's my spiritual father, if he would share with us something I don't know, how he came to live in Moss Vale, where I first met him.
We can let other people broaden the story, but yeah, Moss Vale was wonderful to move there, and the times we spent working on the AaronBlomeley school. Remember, if we talk about history, back in the 50s and 60s, you were not really a Bahai until you spent at least one winter school at AaronBlomeley, where you'd freeze to death and share a 10-gallon water heater with 30 people. And so this was our area of martyrdom, I think. Working with Edwin and others, the AaronBlomeley school was a focus of a lot of our attention. And thank you, Edwin. And we've shared a long and spiritual life together. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Didn't exactly say why you ended up there, but you said it was a bit like a martyrdom. So, Edwin, there's your answer there. Out to you, please.
So was it Ahmad that was next?
Oh, yeah, Aaron, Alapa, thanks for your talk. I do remember when I was in Hurstville in 1980s, you were in Randwick, and the Randwick community was a big supporter of the communities around it. My question is, when you were in Darwin and Ruhi Khanum came there, how many Baha'is were there? And was Ruhi Khanum going around Australia, visiting different communities? And what was your impression? I know you said you felt you are a simple person and didn't have impressions, but what was your impressions of the Ruhi Khanum?
She was up for rest and recreation. She'd been out here, I think, for dedication of the Australian Bahai Temple and was moving on overseas. So there was just half a dozen of us. We had a lot of consultation beforehand whether she should stay with the Bahai family or not. And we thought that would cause too much friction in the community. Why did she stay with you and not with me? So she stayed in the Hotel Darwin, which was the only air-conditioned building in Darwin at the time. So that was a good place for her to be. And she was very, very tired. And it was a very relaxed time to be with her. Not a lot of deep discussion because she was exhausted from the work she'd been doing.
Next question from David Hassel. Looks like David Hassel just left the building. Is that right? Is he coming back? He's coming back.
It's coming. It's coming. Millie was returned. There he's back.
Oh, thank you. Unmuted.
Yeah, you're
unmuted.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I agree with John Walker that to discuss Randwick's, what happened in Randwick would take a whole night, I think. There are lots of fascinating things there. They were lucky because they had the University of New South Wales right in the middle of Randwick. So we got lots of students that visited, and a lot of pioneers went out from there to various places without going into detail, but that detail would be for another night. Maybe I can just mention the fastest person I ever saw to join the faith was Robert Manell. Came to an open day thing at University of New South Wales, and he said, what are you people, sort of thing, and we explained in a short sentence what we were doing. He said, oh, I'll join. Yeah, so he joined in about, it was what, about 15 seconds. So that was one of our successes. So thank you for the opportunity to mention. And I was nice to hear Moss and his interesting tale about how he came here. He had a lot more to that story, how he had a lot of difficulties which he overcame. But that's for another night. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for that, friends. We're coming near to the end, so I'm just checking if there's anybody else with their hand up. I'm sorry if I've missed a few on the way.
I just want to say that, David, your house in Randwick was the center of Bahai activities at the time when I was in Hurstville.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Can I just retort to that? Judy had a big part in that. She was a terrific hostess and always enjoyed having young people to the house. So we remember Judy when we talk about Randwick. Thank you, friends.
Right. Yes, and Florence pointing out that Oswald Whittaker's resting place is in Randwick, the first Australian Bahai is there. I don't know if there's anything to add about the, I know he was looking at the question of which graves around the country need to be honoured and preserved, that sort of thing, because, you know, after 100 years, you don't get to keep your grave. It has to become a historic site in a way. So Farron, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Graham, could I just say that, is that okay?
Yes, John.
Hearing all of Aaron's recollections and all of the people that he met brings back so many memories of all of those people. It's sort of quite an emotional experience. I'm particularly thinking of Harold and Florence Pfitzner. And you know, I visited East Timor a few years ago and visited the grave of Harold Pfitzner. But I met him a number of times when he was alive. You know, it's just so many different stories and recollections. Eric Bowes is another person that made quite an impression on me when I was young. So it's sort of quite emotional to hear these stories.
Well, thank you, John. I don't know what to say. That's to have you. Let me say that the purpose of this series is for us to raise these stories, raise our awareness of our own history. And these presentations are not meant to be polished, finished product. The idea is that we learn to share and we learn to document and record so that we have this record for the future. And I just want to share the screen to point out that what can you see? Can you see my screen properly? That next week I'm going to speak about Collis Featherston. But the week after, June Perkins will speak about Fred Murray.
Excuse me,
Someone needs to just mute themselves there.
Sorry, there's an echo behind your voice. It's hard to hear you.
Graham, I think you have to mute.
I think that's okay now. But I wanted to point out these later sessions are about methodology, how to use new technologies. Satu is online with us now. She's going to come on in a few weeks' time. She's the National Archivist now, and she's going to tell us about developing our local national archives. And Vicky Majewski is going to come on and talk on the tools of genealogy. Vicky's going to share with us some of the amazing things that she has found out about the first Australian Baha'is. It's going to be a very special session. And then a session on Trove, which is an online way to look through all the newspapers in Australia, and we can research so that in whichever community you're part of, you can look for the names of those early believers and see what was in the newspapers. And you'll be surprised how much was in the newspapers at the time. So I wanted to just encourage you to be forthcoming with these stories, some of which we'll have time to share here online, but others you can write about and you can speak about in your communities. You can create booklets. You can contribute to the national newsletter, the Bahai Bulletin. There are many ways in which we can record these stories. Now, this is Australia, but also the story of the New Zealand community, the Pacific communities, the Australian pioneers in the Pacific. So there's many more series that we can envisage coming up as we go forward. But not everybody has to join in. It's an optional activity. It's those of us who love to hear about our history and those who went before. So thank you so much for coming online tonight. Aaron, I want to just hand to you if you've got any final thoughts for tonight. You've now had a chance to share. You may have thought of one story that you'd wish you'd thrown in there. So before we leave, let's see if you've got one last thought to share with us or memory, and then we'll say goodnight for this time.
When I spoke about Alice Dorr and feel like I spoke about that connection with the spirit, if I may just take another, or less than 5 minutes anyway, a story of Papua New Guinea. There's a village down there in Papua in the middle of the swamp, isolated from everything, and called Suki. And one evening, there were two brothers that, not one evening, but two brothers wanted to start a new church. They were very unsettled with the Christian missionaries. And one brother died before they could set it up. And sometime later, the other brother received a dream from his brother saying, no, you don't need a new church. We need a new religion. And the person that starts this is, and he gave a description of Abdul Baha. Now, how to describe that to a person that's lived in Papua, I'm not too sure. But the brother rushed out and said to everybody, okay, forget about the new church. There's this personage, there's this person we have to find. And they all laughed and said, oh, poor uncle, he's obviously a bit demented. Well, his nephew went to Lay, to university. And I met his nephew later on. And he said he met Baha'is, and he was walking up the stairs into the Baha'i Centre in Lay. At the top of the stairs was a picture of Abdul Baha. And he walked in and he said, that's the man. That's the man my uncle was talking about. Mm. So he said, at that moment, I became a Baha'i. And so when he was due to go back to his village, remember this is, no, you cannot fly there. It's in the middle of the swamp. It's maybe 6 hours by boat. And so he flies back to the nearest airport, takes back all these pamphlets, gets the boat back to his village, calls his uncle and shows him the pamphlets. And the uncle says, that's him. You thought I was mad, didn't you? But this is the man I dreamt about. This is the man my brother told me to seek. And I love these stories because sometimes we fret about our contact with the spiritual world. And most of us in the Western world have hidden it up with smoky cars and big houses. These people are the ones in connection with Baha'u'llah.
Thank you, Aaron. That was just wonderful. Again, one last share from me is that there will be a second series on community histories, and that will be in August, September. And there'll be one night devoted to each state. And there are some states where friends have already been historians of those communities, and they will share their findings and also what we need to learn further. And some states we're still looking for people to volunteer to those. They'll go ahead anyway because we've already got some information, but it'd be great to have people online from those states. You're welcome to come to all of these or just pick up those that are of most interest to you. So that's what's coming up. Friends, we must bring tonight to a close. It's been an hour and a half. And so thank you so much for coming online. There'll be another session Saturday night. Happens to be me, but that's because Yvonne.
Merci, merci.
So thank you so much for coming online tonight. Aaron, thank you so much. I think we all maybe unmute ourselves and clap, wave, sing, praise him. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you.
Good night to all. See you Saturday evening. You too.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Chris. Here I am.
Chris.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Sue and David. Sue and David. Sue and David, I walk past your house every day. 38 Melody Street.